I am an ordinary college teacher. I never liked noisy companies and parties. I had enough time to spend with my wife, watch a movie with her, or just talk. And then we had a wonderful son, and I completely immersed myself in the family. But I did not even suspect that one day would change my life to before and after. I am Ryan Yang, a 34-year-old man working as a college teacher and thoroughly enjoying my position. I have a 32-year-old wife, Doris, and we've been together for 8 years. During this time, we welcomed a wonderful son named Keith, who just turned 4. If asked whether I am happy, I would confidently say yes. Everything is going well in my life. By the way, Doris also works as a college teacher. It's our joint venture. We met when we were studying in college, and I had no idea that I would marry this girl. We simply collaborated on projects, spent a lot of time studying, and discussed science. We could stay at each other's homes and retreat to our rooms. I believe that when a man and a woman have such close contact, a connection is inevitable. It happened to us. Initially, we exchanged glances, but things progressed further and further until Doris found herself on my writing desk, right in front of me. Our first time happened in my room, with parents on the other side of the wall. We tried to be as quiet as possible to avoid being heard. Despite Doris not being into sports, she had a beautiful figure and a tender, youthful body. We realized our mutual attraction when our meetings became a daily occurrence. We had intense passion, leading us to decide to become a couple. Later, I proposed to Doris. Doris's parents were very supportive. Her father, Mr. Wilkins, was a petroleum engineer, and they were well off enough to gift us a house where Doris and I settled successfully. I don't know what we would have done without them. Because, to be honest, with my teacher's salary, it would have taken me 10 years, or even more, to save up for such a house. So, it was an excellent foundation for starting a family. We often visit Doris's parents, and I enjoy spending time with them, feeling like a true family. Doris was not the only child. When Doris was little, her mother decided to leave Mr. Wilkins, leaving him with young Doris. After that, Doris stayed with her father, and it was a challenging period in their lives. Her father drank a lot, and Doris had to take care of household duties besides her studies, which was quite tough. Over time, everything changed for the better when Mr. Wilkins' life introduced a woman named Beverly. She had escaped from her ex-husband, who regularly subjected her to physical abuse. Not only her, but also their son, Albert, who was 4 years younger than Doris. As a result, Mr. Wilkins married Beverly, and Doris gained a stepbrother. They had a close-knit family, but there was one aspect that always bothered me. Doris's brother, Albert. I can't say I had negative feelings toward him. On the contrary, I was neutral. However, Doris always wanted me to get along with him, to get along with Albert normally. I don't understand what the problem is. Can't you see how he looks at me with disdain? He looks at you just fine. You're making up problems in your head again, and getting upset over nothing. I don't know why, but I felt some dislike toward her brother. Still, the most important thing for me was that my relationship with Mr. Wilkins was good, and I didn't care much about Albert. I understood that Doris wanted us all to be friendly, but I don't know. This guy annoys me. I never told Doris directly, but I often noticed how Albert looked at her, how he interacted with her. It seemed like he wanted her, so I tried to keep Doris away from him. Maybe I'm going crazy thinking this way, but anything is possible in life. So this situation bothered me. Doris and I also had a massive argument when I came home from work and saw Albert in our house, sitting in the kitchen, having a friendly conversation with Doris. I understand he's her brother and all, but first, he wasn't her biological brother, and second, to me, he was always a stranger. And what should you do when a stranger is on your territory? Right, kick him out. So I tactfully and without aggression escorted Albert out of my house and tried to explain my position to Doris, but she refused to listen. To be honest, it always irritated me when Doris interacted with her brother. I'm not a tyrant and didn't want to restrict Doris in anything, but her brother, at 28, hadn't started a family, still lived in his parents' house, and kept taking odd jobs. I didn't like his lifestyle. Maybe if he had achieved a certain status, I would have befriended him. But as it stood, he was a freeloader who meddled in our private life. When Doris and I planned to go shopping in the city because we had received our salaries, we decided to leave Keith with her parents. And you know what? When we came to pick up Keith, Albert had tagged along. He spent the entire day with us, holding back a lot and enduring for the sake of his wife, always making concessions. So when I saw Albert's name on the guest list for my birthday, it just exploded inside me. I was supposed to have my birthday in a week, turning 35, a milestone, a round number. We planned to rent a house for a party and invite all our friends to sit together and celebrate. I used to dislike such parties, but Doris insisted strongly, especially because she wanted to have some fun. We intended to invite at least 20 people, including ourselves. These were all people we went to college with, and we actively maintained connections with. However, when I saw Albert on the list, Doris and I had a real showdown. Doris tried to convince me that Albert is also a close member of our family, and he would be deeply hurt if we didn't invite him. She told me that Albert would behave appropriately and that he's her brother who helped her get through a difficult childhood, and I should accept him, at least for her sake. It was hard for me to agree, but in the end, she managed to persuade me, because I didn't want to argue with her. 2 weeks after my birthday, we were supposed to fly to the islands for a proper vacation. This trip was important to me, because we had been saving up for it for over 3 years, so I didn't want to spoil the mood for both of us. A day before my birthday, Doris and I went to see the rented house, and it was simply fantastic. A large outdoor pool, a barbecue, a spacious cozy hall with darts, a pool table, a great audio system, everything for a good time. Looking at the house again, I realized that I did want to relax, considering that I didn't do it as often as I would have liked. After inspecting the house, we went to a restaurant, drank wine, and chatted about our future. I was happy to be with Doris. She was a real goddess to me, for whom I was ready to take all the laurels. Returning home, we were completely alone, because Keith had gone to his grandparents for a couple of days. So, Doris and I had an unforgettable evening. We first took a bath together, and then wrapped in a single towel. We lay down in bed. My cool body touched Doris's warm body, which looked absolutely stunning. I was sure that all the college students lusted after her, and I was so happy that she was only mine. The day of my birthday arrived, and I woke up to my son Keith bouncing on the bed, shouting, "Happy birthday, Dad!" It melted my heart. As I stepped into the hallway, my parents, Doris's parents, Doris and Albert, greeted me. I wasn't bothered at all that Albert was here. Everyone wished me well, and we headed to the dining table. The plan was to spend the first half of the day with our parents and gather for a party at our house in the evening. The beginning of the day was fantastic. We spent time with our closest ones, and around 2 in the afternoon, Doris and I were alone in the house, getting ready to leave. I playfully disrupted Doris from getting ready. I was in a playful mood. When I saw the lingerie she was wearing today, I couldn't resist, and we ended up making love. Something in me awakened, and I felt hyperactive. It seemed like I could conquer anything at that moment. It reminded me of the feelings from childhood during holidays, and I was happy to experience it again. Ready to leave, Doris and I had to pick up a couple of people, Justin and Jane, who were going to help us with the house preparations, and Albert, whom we had to wait for about 20 minutes. At that moment, I wanted to start expressing impatience, but then quickly calmed down, choosing not to spoil the mood for myself and those around me. Upon reaching our destination, we began the usual preparations. Doris's friends also arrived to help with cooking. Their task was to prepare tasty cocktails and a couple of snacks, as we planned to buy the main food. Meanwhile, the guys and I took care of all the technical aspects, moving sofas, setting up the audio system, and, in general, handling the manly work. Literally within 2 hours, Everything was ready for the celebration. By this time, the main crowd had arrived. Unfortunately, a couple of people couldn't make it, so there were exactly 18 people, including me and Doris. But it didn't bother me at all. So we continued the fun. Everyone was slightly tipsy. We started with group games, which were our specialty. The evening went pretty well. Everyone laughed and enjoyed themselves. I intentionally didn't drink much to keep a clear head. I knew my limits and didn't want to consume too much alcohol, unlike Doris, who was already quite drunk. The real fun began when one person wanted to jump into the pool, then another, and soon half of the guys were in the pool. I didn't want to swim, so I watched everything from the sidelines with my friend Justin. Doris was also in the pool. She deliberately wore her best and most revealing swimsuit, looking stunning. I hoped the water would sober her up a bit. Albert jumped into the pool later, causing real chaos. He splashed around with everyone, and it seemed like everyone was having fun. I was also invited, but I declined because I didn't want to. I noticed Albert getting very close to Doris. It looked like they were engaged in some conversation, but after a few minutes, Doris decided to get out of the pool and approached me. She began to plead with me to join everyone in the pool, but I said I would take a dip when the pool was semi-empty. I hinted to her that I wanted to swim separately with her, while everyone else was in the main hall of the house. Doris listened to me and pretended as if she understood everything, but unexpectedly, she pushed me so hard that I fell into the pool fully clothed, with my phone and cocktail. She started laughing and had more alcohol. I was upset by her actions. I just didn't expect such a betrayal. But then Doris jumped straight to me, and we started kissing. I felt uncomfortable because most people were already heavily intoxicated, and I had hoped for a cultured evening, not this debauchery. I left the pool. I was getting annoyed with what was happening. I wanted a classy party, but it turned into complete debauchery. I went into the house and headed to the second floor to a room to change. I heard someone having sex in the adjacent room, but I didn't bother them and went into another room. There were a total of 4 people on the second floor. I began changing clothes, doing it as slowly as possible, hoping that Doris would come to me. At least she saw what mood I was in, and she knew I went to change. So I comforted myself with the thought that she would come soon. But the minutes dragged on, and there was no sign of Doris. Then I decided to abandon this tactic. I finished changing, left the room, and went downstairs to the hall where a couple of guys were sitting. I engaged in a conversation with them. I can't say how much time passed, but about 20 minutes by the feel of it. During this time, many people had left the pool. I decided to go outside to check on Doris, but I didn't see her in the pool. Then I asked Justin, who was swimming at the time. He said he didn't know where Doris was. She left the pool at about the same time as I did and went to the house. I didn't understand how it happened because I was sitting and waiting for her in our room. How could we have missed each other? Then I glanced at the pool again and didn't see Albert in it. My heart skipped a beat. I thanked Justin for the information and headed to the house. Quickly going upstairs to the second floor, I started listening for sounds. It was quiet, but from the opposite room I heard soft slapping sounds, as if someone was being intimate. Approaching that door and putting my ear to it, I started listening to what was happening inside and heard distinct sounds of intense passion. I tried my best not to think of the worst, and just tried to listen to discern whose moans those were. Suddenly, someone touched my shoulder. It was Justin. I gestured for him to be quiet and not make any unnecessary noise, and he understood. Together, like true gorillas, we stood by the door and listened. At some point, Justin came up with an idea. He suggested knocking on the door and asking when the room would be available, and then, by the voice, we could determine who it was. Justin confidently knocked and asked when the room would be available. A female voice immediately replied. At that moment, I thought I was going crazy, because it was the distinct voice of my wife Doris. Justin confirmed my suspicions, and we couldn't think of anything better than to break down the door. After 2 strong blows, People from downstairs came to see what we were doing. From the fourth strong blow, we managed to break down the door, revealing such a scene before us. My wife, completely naked, lies on the bed, and on top of her is Albert. The most insulting part was that throughout all of this, Albert continued the act. He clearly wasn't himself, while Doris apparently quickly came to her senses and started pushing Albert off her. "I was looking for you," she began to say. I just looked at her, and then turned to the crowd, which was watching it all. With shouts, I asked them to go downstairs. Only Justin stayed with me, and we entered the room. The first thing I wanted to do was hit Albert, but Doris began to defend him. Albert, however, was so drunk, and it was evident that he was unwell. He couldn't hold it and started vomiting right on the bed. I felt disgusted approaching them. At that moment, Doris stood up, swaying, and began to approach me, apologizing. It was sickening to watch all of this, and I rushed out of the room and then out of the house. I saw the crowd of eyes looking at me. I asked for a taxi, and everyone started looking for a car for me. There was a guy named Wayne who hadn't been drinking and wanted to drive me. I was still downstairs when suddenly I heard a loud scream, "Sorry!" and saw Doris, naked, rolling down the stairs into the common area. Everyone could see her in that state. I was so ashamed that I left the house as soon as possible. I didn't care about anything anymore. I wanted to go to Mr. Wilkins and explain the whole situation to him. I felt completely sober and aware of everything I saw in the house. Wayne was my classmate at school, and we maintained a good relationship, so we drove in silence all the way. He turned on loud music and just drove me. At the end of the way, I thanked him and went to the Wilkins house. It was midnight. Everyone had been asleep for a long time, but I didn't care. And after a couple of unsuccessful, finally, Mr. Wilkins opened the door for me, and then his wife joined us. Justin texted me in, which he said that Doris eventually fell asleep in the bathroom. She felt sick. I was not surprised and began to tell Doris' parents the whole story. Mr. Wilkins already had gray hair, but after my story, it felt like it had become even grayer. Mr. and Mrs. Wilkins sat in disbelief and did not understand how this could happen. They shared that, when Doris and Albert were teenagers, they hid and slept together at night. They were caught and scolded a couple of times, but they did not think that such childish pranks would affect adult life. Mr. Wilkins advised me not to make hasty decisions and suggested discussing everything with Doris. Reluctantly, I agreed, but later decided to go through the gallery on my phone and started scrolling through photos when it hit me. I came across a picture of Albert and Keith on Keith's birthday, and it seemed to me, but I noticed a resemblance in their facial features. It horrified me, and I went into Keith's room, where he was peacefully sleeping. I began comparing their faces and found many similarities. I asked Mr. Wilkins if he noticed anything, but the answer was negative. Losing trust in him, I quickly woke up Keith and headed home with him. I just couldn't believe that one day could change my life so drastically. I didn't sleep the whole night and awaited the clinic's opening. As a precaution, I decided to hide the money Doris and I were saving for a joint trip. I took a DNA test, and the results would take 3 days. During that time, I took measures to secure myself completely, such as freezing the bank accounts, changing locks at home, and more. The next day, I received over 15 videos, starting from the moment I broke the door and ending with what Doris staged the next day. Doris slept in the bathroom all night, and then she started throwing a tantrum and wrecking the entire house. I found it amusing, because by the documents she rented this house, and it was her idea, meaning she'd have to pay for the broken door and the mess. But then her parents came, taking her and Albert home. I don't know what happened there, but for all those days, neither Keith nor I were bothered. Friends called and supported me. Rumors of Doris's infidelity had already spread in college, but what consequences she would face remained unknown. Meanwhile, I received the DNA test results on paternity, and it turned out to be negative. I looked at Keith, and it was difficult for me to accept that he wasn't my son. I just couldn't believe it. It was a very delicate truth for me. I filed for divorce, hoping that Keith would stay with me and Albert wouldn't claim him. A month later, the court ruled that Keith would stay with his biological parents, as he was still young and wouldn't understand much at his age. I felt sad about this news, but later I found out that Mr. Wilkins deliberately made Albert take the child. I found it to be a pathetic move. Mr. Wilkins and Doris didn't say a word to me. They avoided communication, although I was the victim in this situation. Doris lost her job. She was fired from her teaching position because everyone in college knew about the incident at home and talked about it. Her reputation was tarnished, and she was to blame for it. In the end, I had to move to another house, and now I live completely alone. I managed to keep most of the money and leave Doris with nothing. She only got a portion of the proceeds, not the full amount. What I know now is that Doris and Albert live with their parents, raising their child, no matter how terrible it sounds. None of them reached out to me. They clearly resented me, but I didn't care. The most important thing was that no one else turned away from me. Everyone supported and sympathized with me. Later, I found out that Doris and Albert had a connection for a long time, engaging in intimacy regularly, considering it a normal occurrence. I was horrified, and even after 1.5 years, I still regret having entered into marriage with this woman and spent 8 years in it.
Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.